Welcome back to our community. Susie Thomas visiting with adoptive mom Gail Wiesand, and who also is employed at 4Kids. Tell us a little bit about that.
4Kid Help is a private practice. It was begun by Dr. Lee Reynolds a few years ago. He's a fabulous child psychiatrist, and he's assembled a staff of nurse practitioners and counselors who work with children who have special emotional needs.
Now, you would be real astute at this because some of your children that you adopted also were children with special needs. How did you relate what was going on personally and be able to have that inform what you do professionally?
I was able to learn a great deal by working with my children because many of them came with feelings of anger or rejection or abandonment because of losing their birth families. So my husband and I spent a lot of time in training for adoptive parents to try to learn how to be of help to them. And some of the things that we learned from them are really useful now because I can see as it plays out that they're really functional adults who've been able to understand their past history and integrate it with who they are now and make sense out of it so that it isn't bothering them all the time. I've also been able to learn from friends out in the community. Many of our friends were adoptive parents, and I was able to watch how their children grew and blossomed. And then, of course, I went to school at the University of Akron and learned a great deal in the Masters of Social Work program there as well.
Mm-hmm. What are your children doing now?
Oh, we've got a gunnery sergeant in the Marine Corps.
And thank you for his service. Wow.
It's an amazing thing.
Mm-hmm.
We have a counselor, a special ed school teacher. We've got an auto mechanic. This is really handy, some of these things.
No kidding. You don't have to pay for anything.
We have one working at McDonald's, and it's really fun to go see her there.
That's great.
And we have a nurse living in Clearwater, Florida. We have two who own their own hair salons, one in Manhattan and one here in Canton on Dressler Road. We have children that work in workshops who have some mental delays but are able to work and make a paycheck and get a lot accomplished that way. Mm-hmm. We have a factory worker. We have a little bit of everything.
It's just exciting. And your husband, a pharmacist?
Yes, Denny's a pharmacist at Valley View Pharmacy down in the Canton South area.
I'm sure that came in handy as well, going through cold and flu season every once in a while.
Oh, yes, that's been fabulous because he was really able to understand what was going on out in the community, what kind of germs were going around, what was probably just a virus and what was more serious, and had a lot of medical training and give shots. So these are all handy things.
All handy
to have
things.
Someone in the family that knows all this.
For a family of 17. How did you go anywhere? Well, how many minivans were you driving at once to go as a family did you go on vacations?
We did. We went on vacation every year at least once, usually 2 or 3 times we went places. And we mostly stayed and visited with either family or other large adoptive families that then came to our home. So it was great to be able to go visit a family who also had 10 or 12 kids because they had a house that was big enough for us to stay in. And we'd usually take a rec room or family room and have the kids bring their sleeping bags and just hang out with them. Although some of the families we became very close to, one in St. Louis, we saw a couple times a year on a regular basis.
Oh, my
because
gosh.
their kids were the same ages as ours. They had the same number. They had the same kind of breakdown. And our kids all had a best friend with their family. So with those guys, it was like going and spending the night with a friend, only each of them had one in the same house.
It all just sounds like so much fun. I remember you saying at the time when you had a lot of teenagers all at one time. And, you know, when people are adopting these cute little babies or young children, no one thinks, oh my goodness, they're all going to be teenagers at the same time. I remember you saying, I believe that every teenager should have their own room. So as you kind of alluded to a little bit earlier in our talk, you had a 14-bedroom home. Now, how does someone put that up for sale? It's not Downton Abbey, but to be able to say, here's a 14-bedroom, how many baths?
5.
5-bathroom home. How did you market that?
We actually took down some of the walls between rooms so there weren't quite so many. And a lot of them were on the second floor. 6 of the bedrooms were on the second floor. So that was viewed as kind of an attic in the listing. So it had been built originally as a private club for some of the wealthier people in Canton to go, and sort of a private gambling club. So it had maids' quarters, and it had a bouncer's room. And the main room had buzzers that went through it to the maid's quarters so she could be buzzed. It had a pretty elaborate buzzer system.
And did that still work while you were living there?
No, we took that out right away.
I was going to say that.
It was in working condition.
Wow.
But the person who had that bedroom didn't really appreciate being buzzed.
I guess. That's right.
And it had a lot of space in it. So the people that were looking at it were mostly people that wanted a larger home where they could kind of spread out. It had some acreage around it. And we ended up selling it to another pharmacist, which was interesting.
That's so interesting. All right. Well, let's talk about adoption in general, because I can just go on and on. Hearing your personal stories are fascinating, and maybe we'll get a chance to come back and hear more about the Wisens specifically. But let's talk about adoption in a more general way. I think a lot of people who do not adopt don't adopt because they are afraid for one reason or another about what influences might come with a child and how that might influence their naturally born children. Can you address that a little?
Yes, it's a valid concern. You've got to be very careful who you bring into your home. Fortunately, when you adopt locally, you have access to a lot of information about the child. And you can read that child's study. You can read a psychological study. You can get a sense of who is coming into your home. When you adopt from a foreign orphanage, there can be a lot of information or there can be very little. It varies greatly from program to program. When we adopted through Holt, we got several pages of information, and it proved to be really valid information once the children came, especially even the medical information. We got things like chest x-rays and vaccination records. So we felt like we knew that part. What you can never know is what happens when the children are all together. Mm-hmm. The mix of the chemistry and the personalities. So that's where you've got to be careful. When you're adopting a local child, you have a chance to have visits with them first. And if the chemistry between the children is terrible, nobody wants that to go on. Mm-hmm. So that's the purpose for the visits, the pre-placement visits. Once a placement's been made, it's much more difficult to uproot children and move them. So you want to make sure before you do this. And if it means you have extra visits, then that's what you ask for. And social workers are very well aware that not every match is going to be perfect from the beginning. And they're very supportive as you explore whether this child's an option for the family.
Do the children themselves get an opportunity to say, oh, I really like this family. I enjoyed visiting with this family, but I feel like part of this family?
Yes. That's part of the process of even finding a home for a child, to sit down with them before they've done any looking out there in the community and find out if there's someone from their extended family or a teacher or a best friend's parents that maybe would be interested, because it would make the most sense to go in that direction.
I would think to be an adopted child, you would feel so special because you would be chosen. And yet, one of the things you say you needed to deal with so frequently was that feeling of abandonment. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yes. In a way, our children did feel good that we had chosen them from all the children in the world, that they were the ones we wanted. And when we reminded them of that, they would often smile. But late at night, when you start thinking about your birth family, and you start wondering why you can't be with them, and wondering why things came apart, and whether the story you were told was really true about that, can be a whole nother matter. And sometimes the children feel abandonment. Sometimes they feel a sense of a tug of loyalty, that they should be loyal to their birth family and that they're being less loyal by loving this family. And that's why it's important for adoptive families to allow the children to love their birth family too, to remind them that you don't have to lose that family to gain this one. You can love both of us. It's especially hard for adoptive families to do when the children have been badly abused.
Mm-hmm. You say you keep in touch with some of your children with their birth families and that they've all kind of, how does that work?
For all of our children that could find birth family, they have found them.
Wow.
Many of the adoptions were open from the beginning, and we love the idea of including birth family as part of the family. So for us, it was very comfortable. They couldn't always come to our house because it might not be appropriate, but we could always meet at a Starbucks and have coffee together and talk, or go to McDonald's for lunch and be able to exchange gifts and that kind of thing with them. So we tried to leave that door open for our children if it was possible, because it's a part of their history and who they are. And we never wanted them to lose that to gain us. They could have both. But it's a little tricky sometimes for children that are abandoned in orphanages. They have no way of knowing any information at all if they're left in one of the baby cradles in front of an orphanage. If their birth date wasn't written down for them, or their name, if someone didn't give information, we do nothing. So tracking down a birth parent under those circumstances is hard, and that's true for 3 of our children.
Mm-hmm. Speaking with Gail Wiesand, she's an adoptive mom and a social worker who works with other adoptive parents. You must be the most comforting person for someone who is going through an adoption to sit down, because whatever questions they would have, you would have already lived it. And
sometimes.
So how does that work? Now let's talk about someone, and I know there's someone listening and they say, this has been working on me. I know we're supposed to adopt. What would be the steps? What would be a good progression, stages to get yourself ready, your home ready, your family ready, and then proceed?
Well, my husband and I always had a period of time where we prayed about it, thought about it, rolled it over in our minds, and made sure that we were both on the same page. In our case, after the first few adoptions, we began to be offered children who were available, and we would get a call out of the blue by someone who said, there's an adoption that's disrupting, we want you to take this child. So those cases were a little more of an emergency. It was more unusual, not what you would expect to encounter. The most usual first step would be to make a period of inquiry, to go to agencies and talk to them, to go to their information nights, to get the books out of the library, to get online and look at some of the adoption chat groups, to begin to look in whatever way is most comfortable for you to research this and see if you can picture yourself in this position. Mm-hmm. I think it's an amazingly rewarding and beautiful experience, but it isn't for everyone, and you want to make sure that it's the right thing for your family to do. There are a number of agencies in this area that have information nights. Besides the county agency, there are private agencies. So I wouldn't recommend one particular one, but I think we're led to the ones that we're supposed to find into those programs. International adoption is very big right now. Many children coming from foreign countries. China probably is the one I see the most children coming from, and many agencies are licensed to work there. So I would just urge people to do their homework very carefully first before embarking on this, and the education then will become a part of working with that agency.
Well, it's been awesome speaking with you, Gail Wiesand, and all my best. Merry Christmas to you and to Denny, to all 74 of you, and God bless you, and thank you for joining us in our community.
Thank you, Susie.